In the cloud forests of Central America, the trees disappear into mist. Water beads on moss and orchids. Sound travels strangely here, muffled, distant. Then a flash of green moves through the canopy. A bird glides between branches and settles on a limb, its feathers catching the light like metal. From beneath its tail trails long, ribbon-like plumes, swaying gently in the fog. For a moment it is completely still, watching, waiting. This is the Quetzal. For centuries, birds like this were treated as more than animals. Their feathers were traded, worn, and protected by law, under rules that limited harm long before conservation became a scientific discipline. Today, they are studied as members of an ancient bird family, specialized, constrained, and deeply tied to the forest they inhabit. The myths surrounding Quetzals matter, but to understand them, we need to begin with the biology, before culture and science meet again. If you'd like to learn more, check out the document in the description with research papers and image credits. Quetzal is not a formal taxonomic rank, but it does refer to a specific group of birds across two genera, Pharomachrus and Euoptilotus. Together, these birds represent some of the most ornamented members of the already colourful and elaborate Trogonidae family. Trogons are recognizable by their long, squared-off tails, brightly coloured feathers, and clear differences between males and females. These traits are widespread across the family, not unique to Quetzals. What Quetzals do is push this visual template further, extending tail coverts, intensifying colour, and exaggerating sexual dimorphism far beyond most trogons. Trogons are quite unlike any other birds. This is most clear when looking at their feet. Bird feet are not something most people think about, but toe arrangement tells us a great deal about how a bird lives. Trogons have a configuration known as heterodactyl, and they are the only birds alive with this exact arrangement. 2 toes point forwards and 2 backwards, but which toes face which way matters. In trogons, the 3rd and 4th toes point forwards, while the 1st and 2nd point backwards. This makes heterodactyl different from zygodactyl feet, seen in parrots, cuckoos, and woodpeckers, where the 2nd and 3rd toes face forwards, and the 1st and 4th point backwards. This difference may seem like semantics, but it has major consequences. Zygodactyl feet are perfect for climbing and gripping vertical surfaces. Heterodactyl feet are not. Instead, they are perfectly suited to stable perching. For trogons, the forest is a platform, not a ladder, and most of their lives are spent quietly watching from it. This stillness is reflected in their feeding strategy. Trogons are not enthusiastic flyers. Their wings are short and capable of powerful bursts, but lack endurance. Most species prefer to fly only short distances at a time. Trogons are sit-and-wait hunters and foragers, making brief, direct flights to snatch insects or fruit before returning to the same perch. Most species are highly faithful to a particular patch of forest, rarely venturing far. They also nest in cavities, usually in soft or decaying wood, which further ties them to stable, mature forests. Within this conservative framework, Quetzals stand out. They do not break the trogon blueprint, but they push it to an extreme. Longer tails, brighter colours, and a heavier reliance on fruit give Quetzals a very different presence in the forest. Of the two genera of Quetzals, the eared Quetzal, Euoptilotus neoxenus, sits alone. It comes from a slightly earlier lineage from the other Quetzals. It is colourful, but lacks the exaggerated crests or tail feathers seen in some of their more famous relatives. But here, I want to focus on the other genus, the one most people picture when they hear Quetzal, Pharomachrus. Pharomachrus includes 5 species, distributed from southern Mexico through Central America and into the Andes of South America. Collectively, they are known as the true Quetzals, not because they are authentic, but because they take the trogon body plan further than their relatives. To understand this, let's take a quick tour through the different species that make up Pharomachrus. It makes sense to start with perhaps the most iconic member, the Resplendent Quetzal, Pharomachrus mocinno. Found throughout Central America and southern Mexico, it is instantly recognizable. The male's body glows metallic green, shifting between emerald and turquoise, depending on how the light strikes the feathers, a sharp contrast to its crimson breast. But it is the tail that defines the species. During the breeding season, elongated upper tail coverts grow into flowing streamers that can exceed the bird's entire body length, trailing behind it like ribbons as it moves through the canopy. These feathers are not built for efficiency. They create drag, complicate flight, and make rapid escape more difficult. Much like male peacocks, the existence of this tail tells us that survival alone did not shape this bird. Selection through display did. Generation after generation, individuals with longer, more striking plumes secured mates, gradually pushing the species toward visual extravagance. That is sexual selection, a form of natural selection driven not by survival, but by reproductive success. Although known for its splendor, the Resplendent Quetzal is an important part of the cloud forest ecosystem. It is a fruit specialist, with a particular liking for avocados. It will swallow the fruit whole, devouring their massive seeds along with it. This makes them an extremely important seed disperser for avocados and other fruit, playing a large role in ensuring the future regeneration of these forests. Further south, along the coastal mountains of Venezuela and Colombia, lives the white-tipped quetzal, Pharomachrus fulgidus. At first glance, it appears darker, more subdued than its resplendent relative. The greens are deeper, the tones cooler. But when the tail fan opens, the white underside becomes visible. Subtle signals that are easily lost in shadow. Here, spectacle gives way to understatement. This species is strongly tied to humid montane forest, where steep terrain and shifting weather create a patchwork of microhabitats. Rather than long-distance movement, many populations appear to track fruit availability along elevational gradients, ascending and descending the mountains in quiet seasonal rhythms. Much is still unknown about this species, as it has received little scientific attention. One researcher commented that although it has striking plumage, the white-tipped quetzal has few to no other engaging qualities, a judgment that may say more about how rarely it has been studied than about the bird itself. Along the Andes, from Venezuela to Bolivia, the golden-headed quetzal, Pharomachrus auriceps, stands out for its namesake, its golden head. In males, at least. In females, the head is more brown than gold. Compared to the resplendent quetzal, the tail is short, the silhouette more restrained. But this is not a lesser design. It is a different solution to life in steep, high forests where maneuverability may matter more than theatrical length. Andean environments are dynamic. Landslides reshape slopes, fog condenses and vanishes. Fruiting trees fluctuate. Birds here benefit from balance. Enough ornament to communicate, enough practicality to navigate a complicated landscape. The result is a quetzal that feels refined rather than extravagant. The Andes do not belong to just one quetzal. Here we can also find the Crested Quetzal, Pharomachrus antisianus. What makes this species remarkable is not where it lives, but where it lives alongside another quetzal. Its range is extremely similar to the golden-headed quetzal, also found from Venezuela to Bolivia. How do these two closely related birds with similar lifestyles occupy the same forests in the same mountains? The answer lies in elevational partitioning. Where the two ranges overlap, the Crested Quetzal is frequently found in cooler, wetter forests, higher in elevation, moving through mist-laden canopies thick with moss and epiphytes. Mountains do not hold a single habitat, but many stacked atop one another, allowing species to sort themselves out along the slope. So, while the Crested Quetzal is higher up in the mountains, the golden-headed quetzal is more tolerant of a variety of conditions. So, where the two ranges overlap, golden-headed quetzals tend to remain lower on the slope, while the crested dominates the forests nearer the peaks. True to its name, the Crested Quetzal carries a loose crest, crown feathers that give the bird a slightly wider silhouette. It lacks the extravagant streamers of the Resplendent Quetzal, but the crest is just as specialized for sexual selection, and far less of a hindrance. Across Pharomachrus, a pattern has been quietly emerging. These are birds shaped by altitude. But one species breaks the pattern entirely. Drop down from the mountains into the vast Amazon basin, and the atmosphere changes. The forests grow taller, denser, heavier with heat. Here lives the Pavonine Quetzal, Pharomachrus pavoninus, the only member of the genus not primarily bound to high elevations. While most quetzals trace the contours of cloud forests, the Pavonine moves through lowland rainforest, often far below the cool bands that define its relative's world. Yet, despite this shift in altitude, the underlying design remains unmistakable. It still favors shaded perches, still makes short, deliberate flights, and still feeds heavily on fruit. This is not a radical reinvention of the quetzal form. If the mountain species illustrate how precision can narrow a bird's world, the Pavonine suggests another possibility, that the Quetzal blueprint can function beyond the clouds, provided the forest remains vast and continuous. Across the Quetzals, a pattern has been quietly emerging. These are birds shaped by altitude. They occupy narrow climatic bands along mountain slopes, cool enough for clouds to condense, wet enough for moss to overtake bark, and stable enough for fruiting trees to return year after year. Step outside that band, and the forest changes rapidly. Temperatures climb, humidity shifts, and the ecological community transforms. For a bird specialized for life in these conditions, the surrounding landscape can become surprisingly difficult to cross. High mountain forests rarely form continuous blankets across continents. They appear in fragments, separated by valleys that are too warm, ridges that are too dry, or lowlands that demand entirely different adaptations. Each range becomes a biological island suspended above the terrain below. Over time, isolation like this reshapes lineages. When populations become separated, even subtly, they begin to follow their own genetic paths. Mutations accumulate, behaviors shift, displays change. Eventually, what was once a single species may diverge into several, each tuned to the particular conditions of its mountain home. Mountains, in this sense, are both connectors and dividers. Range systems may allow gradual movement, but cross the wrong valley and the cloud forest specialist suddenly finds itself in unsuitable terrain. For species reluctant to travel far, birds that prefer short, deliberate flights and long periods of stillness, even modest barriers can become evolutionary boundaries. The Pavonine Quetzal offers a revealing contrast, one written directly into its range. Instead of being restricted to these islands in the sky, it moves through the lowlands of the Amazon basin, where habitat stretches for thousands of kilometers, with far fewer boundaries. Dispersal is easier here. Populations are less likely to become isolated. Speciation still occurs, but the landscape does less of the work. Seen in this way, mountains do more than provide habitat. They generate diversity. But this creativity comes with a constraint. The same specialization that allows montane quetzals to thrive within a narrow ecological band also ties them tightly to it. When a species evolves to fit a particular slice of climate and forest structure, its world becomes smaller, even if the mountains themselves are immense. In quetzals, beauty has been shaped not just by selection, but also geography, sculpted in cool forests that exist as scattered refuges above a warmer, more continuous world. Isolation does not simply produce new species, it reshapes how those species recognize one another. In dense forests, visibility is limited. Light filters unevenly through layered canopies, scattering into greens and shadows. Movement is often glimpsed rather than fully seen. Under these conditions, being visually distinctive is not a luxury, it is a biological necessity. Across the quetzals, ornament is the language that solves this problem. All quetzals are brightly colored, their plumage built from microscopic feather structures that blend and reflect light into luminous greens, blues, and golds. These colors do not fade like pigments. Instead, they shift with the angle of the sun, flashing briefly through the foliage before dissolving back into the forest. What may appear extravagant to us is, in many ways, precisely tuned to a dim and crowded world. Yet ornament is not just about visibility, it is about identity. When populations become isolated, the signals used to attract mates and recognize rivals can begin to drift. Over generations, small preferences accumulate: a slightly brighter crown, a longer feather, a deeper contrast between chest and belly. Eventually, these differences help define the boundary between one species and another. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the Resplendent Quetzal. Its extraordinary tail is not merely decoration, it is a declaration, a signal shaped by generations of preference, where individuals bearing more dramatic plumes were repeatedly chosen, gradually pushing the species towards visual extremes. At some point in this process, practicality stops defining the upper boundary of a trait. Perception takes over. When individuals consistently choose mates with more dramatic displays, ornament can escalate across generations, sometimes far beyond what practicality might favor. Evolution in these moments is guided as much by perception as by pressure. Other quetzals have taken subtler paths. The Crested Quetzal's raised crown alters its silhouette without burdening flight. Golden-headed quetzals signal through radiant facial color rather than exaggerated length. Each species speaks the same visual language, but with a different accent. Geography may help to explain why. Fragmented mountain habitats restrict movement, reducing the likelihood that separated populations will regularly encounter one another. In these quiet pockets of forest, signals can evolve along slightly different trajectories, refined within the boundaries of each ecological island. Isolation, once again, becomes a creative force, but ornament carries a quiet implication. Traits shaped primarily by mate choice often assume relatively stable conditions. Forests that persist, display grounds that return, and populations dense enough for selection to continue its slow work. The same specialization that produces beauty can also narrow a species' tolerance for change. In the Quetzals, brilliance is not an accident. It is the visible signature of evolution, unfolding within constrained worlds. For millions of years, cloud forests have been places of remarkable climatic consistency. Moisture gathers predictably along mountain slopes. Temperatures shift gradually with elevation. Seasons pass without the dramatic extremes seen in many lowland environments. It is within this long stability that Quetzals were shaped, becoming specialists of cool air, persistent fog, and forests that seemed almost permanent. But stability in nature is rarely absolute. Today, the conditions that define cloud forests are beginning to move. As global temperatures rise, the altitude at which clouds reliably form is shifting upward. The ecological bands these birds depend upon are slowly climbing the mountainsides, compressing against the terrain above them. Yet, mountains do not grow taller as climates warm. Eventually, there is simply nowhere left to go. Biologists sometimes describe this process as an escalator to extinction. Species tracking their preferred climate upslope until their habitat disappears beneath their feet. For highly specialized birds, even small changes matter. A slight warming may alter when trees fruit. A change in moisture can restructure the forest itself. What appears subtle to us can redraw the boundaries of an entire ecosystem. Alongside this vertical pressure comes a more familiar force: deforestation. Montane forests are cleared for agriculture, pasture, settlement, and further fragmenting habitats that were already naturally patchy. The result is a quiet narrowing of the world. The same geographic forces that once encouraged diversification now amplify vulnerability. Isolation that produced new species can also prevent them from relocating when conditions change. Beauty in this context is not protection. Yet there is reason for cautious optimism. In parts of their range, Quetzals benefit from protected reserves and forests maintained through long-standing stewardship. Conservation here is not only about preserving a single species, but about safeguarding entire elevational ecosystems, intricate biological layers that cannot simply be recreated elsewhere. This optimism is reflected in their current threat ratings. The IUCN lists 4 of the 5 species as least concern. Only the Resplendent Quetzals warrant a more severe rating, being near threatened, a quiet sign of its vulnerability. But these ratings may give a false sense of security. Take the white-tipped Quetzal. Although listed as least concern and considered fairly common within parts of its range, this confidence rests on surprisingly little data. Exact population numbers remain unknown, and the species has received far less scientific attention than its more famous relatives. This reveals a quiet limitation within conservation itself. Sometimes we protect what we understand best. Species that appear secure, especially those living in remote mountain forests, can slip past scrutiny. And for a bird found only across a handful of isolated ranges, security may depend less on how many exist today, and more on how quickly those forests can change. To protect a cloud forest is to protect the climate it generates, the trees that anchor it, and the evolutionary histories written into its inhabitants. Because these birds were never just ornaments of the canopy, they are indicators, living reflections of forests, balanced delicately between altitude, moisture, and time. For humans, Quetzals have long been more than birds. Their iridescent green and crimson feathers, their fleeting presence in mist-shrouded canopies, and their delicate calls have made them symbols of the forest itself, elusive, beautiful, and untouchable. Among the Maya and Aztec, the resplendent Quetzal held a special place. Its tail feathers were considered sacred, used in ceremonial headdresses that adorned kings and priests. To kill a Quetzal was unthinkable. only naturally shed feathers could be collected. In a society where forests and wildlife were intimately woven into cosmology, the Quetzal became associated with Quetzalcoatl, or the feathered serpent. This was the deity of wisdom, wind, and fertility, the union of earth and sky, and the benefactor of humanity, bringing knowledge, agriculture, and calendars to humankind. Quetzals became living icons of this deity, representing freedom, vitality, and divine beauty. This cultural reverence did more than create myth. In practical terms, it limited hunting and encouraged protection of the forest they inhabited. Long before modern conservation existed, people had created rules, a form of stewardship rooted in respect and observation. Even today, Quetzals continue to inspire. They appear in art, literature, and currency. The national bird of Guatemala, the Resplendent Quetzal, lends its name to the country's currency, the Quetzal, a reminder that some birds are more than symbols. They're touchstones linking people to the land and its history. And yet, mythology can also obscure biology. Legends of Quetzals living without touching the ground, or of tail feathers that never fall, may make the species seem eternal and indestructible. In reality, their survival depends on forests that are fragile, fragmented, and increasingly threatened by climate change and human activity. Myth and science meet here. The cultural stories hint at their rarity, while biology explains why they are truly remarkable. Recognizing this intersection can guide conservation in subtle ways. Reverence for Quetzals fosters pride, curiosity, and respect for their habitats. It reminds us that protecting these birds is not only about numbers or classifications, but about preserving the forests that shaped them and the human stories they inspired. Somewhere in the midst of a cloud forest, a flash of green still moves between the trees, a reminder that these ecosystems remain alive, but never guaranteed. In a sense, Quetzals are both mirror and muse, reflecting the delicate balance of cloud forests, and inspiring the humans who have long shared their world. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Quetzals. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.